Well, again, welcome everybody to the 2021 AIA California Town Hall in advance of next week's annual business meeting. Everybody on this call should be an accredited delegate. Thanks for making this commitment to represent the nearly 11,000 members in California. 19 out of 21 chapters in California are represented in this process to take action on resolutions, changes to our governing documents, and to elect our future leaders. As a quick housekeeping reminder, please make sure that your microphone is muted. Specifically during the presentation, we have a large number of people on the call. We will have a Q&A time at the end, so please include your questions in the chat or in the Q&A section, and you can also raise your hand when we get to the Q&A section, and we can recognize as much time or as much people as we can during the time we have left at the end. By now, you should have received an email from AIA about how to access the annual meeting. And on Friday, a link will be added to the annual meeting page on AIA.org. There's a link, I can't see it kind of being blocked by people, but there's a link on the bottom of the slide. New for this year, all members, whether they are delegates or not, can attend the annual meeting and hear the discussions and debate. We've had some questions about the regional caucuses. This is yet another opportunity to hear the candidates and to gain more insight. Of course, we'll be hearing from each of the candidates today, but during the regional caucuses, we are combining with others, and it's always helpful to see them in action in addressing the issues in different forums. To learn more about this process and your role as delegates, I encourage everyone to look through the 2021 Yellow Book if you haven't already. In this, you will find dates for specific events, the processes, and information and issues under consideration this year. And now I'll move on to talk about the proposed bylaws amendments and resolutions. Just to give everybody a little bit of context, if you haven't looked at the Yellow Book yet, regarding the proposed dissolution of AIA regions, Bylaws 21-A. The 2018 AIA Convention resolution asked AIA to document the wide variety of regional structures, missions, resources, and programs, to review the relationship between the Strategic Council and regions, and to identify opportunities to increase member value, promote collaboration among components, align the components at all levels, and make efficient use of dues. Task forces and consultants spent 2 years offering a state-based representation model, which will allow for one representative per state to serve at the Strategic Council. There are some exceptions for larger states based on the number of members, California being one of them. We currently have 4, but in the new model, we would have 3. Texas and New York also have large constituents and would also have multiple representatives beyond the one that all others will have. There will be a 3-year transition period in which AIA would help develop new models of collaboration among states, the 3 years coming from basically all the current strategic counselors would be allowed to complete their term. Some additional background information that we received from the board for the proposed bylaws changes are things like the board proposed the bylaws change will better prepare AIA for the future by providing more equal representation across the AIA. State-based models provide a more equitable path for representation across states, and it'll remove a 4th layer of governance between the members and AIA National. So also quickly on the resolutions, 21-1, -2, and -3. Before we jump into the specifics, I wanted to bring your attention to a related issue. AIA California has a long history of engagement in the resolution process, and many of you are probably aware of the resolution we sponsored in 2020 that was unable to be debated at the time. This resolution was calling for a study of the current governance structure of AIA on all tiers of the organization, the effectiveness of the board of directors and the Strategic Council, and the relationship to one another, to members and member groups. We submitted it for consideration again this year, but after many conversations with national AIA leaders, the other large states, and a large group of members, we decided to withdraw it as the AIA board and President Peter Exley, FAIA, offered to jumpstart the work and created a task force to address these issues. We'll hear about the Members' Voice Task Force during the business meeting next week, and I want you all to have some context for those remarks and to understand California's role in bringing this to light. Related to the previous discussions about the proposed amendments to the bylaws, some feel it's premature to make the significant change to the governance structure while this study is taking place, giving more support for delaying the vote on this amendment, or rather bylaw change. Now, on to the resolutions. AIA Pennsylvania has put forth 3 resolutions for consideration. 2 of these resolutions represent opportunities at the national level to improve the Institute's ability to meet its equity, diversity, and inclusivity goals, while demonstrating leadership to the design and construction industry. Resolution 21-1, objective research into demographics, case studies and financial data, behind investment in underserved communities is a current industry blind spot. Resolution 21-1 will allow the Institute to provide leadership in this space and is necessary for our ability to create a more equitable profession and outcomes through win-win relationships over the long term. Resolution 21-3, the promotion of the U-Dream program. And actually, Nikki, if you could, can you take us through these next two, 21-3 and 21-2 real quick?
Sure.
Thank you.
Oops, sorry. Hi, everyone. So there are these three different resolutions that have been sponsored by AIA Pennsylvania are specific response to a particular issue. So I'm gonna take them a little bit out of order. I'm gonna first talk about 21-2 Architecture Elect Initiative. This one specifically is looking for a way to harness all of the great resources and tools that are available in a number of places to help individuals work through the process to become elected leaders. And there's a lot of interest and desire to bolster the individual architect's ability to enter into the political process. And you know, across the nation, we have great examples of members who are holding elected offices from, you know, their local, you know, city council all the way up to, you know, to legislators. We want to harness that work that's been done and use it to give members the tools, should they wish to go down the same path, give them the tools to be able to do so. So this resolution seeks to create a toolkit, if you will, of those resources and really as a guide to help members who are interested in that process. So that's 21-2. And I'm going to go back to 21-1, research into underserved communities. This is this initiative is looking at how do we better understand all of the factors that influence the development of underserved communities, whether it be the financing mechanisms or you know, the particular barriers in local municipalities, and really pull those together in a way that gives architects the independent tools to have those conversations in their local areas, and really creates this compendium of information and research to create one more you know, kind of tool in the toolbox to help architects in conversations in their local communities. So this is really a large research effort to pull together all of the available information and put it into one place that becomes a good resource for architects throughout the country. So that's that resolution. And the third one is the promotion of the U-Dream program. So this is a program that's currently happening in Pennsylvania. It's been a very successful way to invite underserved communities to be exposed to architecture in a number of points through their education process. And there's been a significant number of examples where this is working very well, both in, you know, starting all the way in from high school all the way through you know, completion of an architecture degree, and how to get more people both exposed to this idea and to replicate this program in some form or fashion in other areas. And it's, you know, one thing AIA Pennsylvania did stress, they're not trying to have a U-Dream program in every, you know, AIA chapter or in every city, but rather to take some of the really great lessons learned as part of that program, take those resources, and one of the real important ones to highlight is the connection with the local schools of architecture to take those partnerships and how do you replicate those elsewhere across the country. So.
Excellent. Thank you for the summary, Nikki. And just for everybody's reference, you can also find all this on AIA's website, all the full breadth of the bylaws proposals that we mentioned, and also the resolutions that Nikki just walked us through. So at this time, we wanted to open the floor if anybody had questions. feel free to unmute yourself, or let's see.
Hey, Brett,
One thing,
ahead.
sorry, Betsy. One thing I just wanted to mention, during the annual meeting, you will hear about the financial impact of these resolutions should they be passed. And they will talk about, you know, whether it's the research initiative and the need to hire a research firm, or you know, some of the programs may have internal staff time associated with them. So I just wanted to make you aware of that, not be surprised. And the order of magnitude for each of these is about $100,000. That's what we have heard. So my apologies, Betsy.
Oh, I don't want to get in the way of talking about money, Nikki. But for any of you who happen to be on the email list with either the former Chancellor of the College of Fellows or the former presidents of AIA, you probably know there's a very robust conversation going on about the bylaws change. First of all, doing it remotely following a pandemic when we can't have that power to deliberate in person together, as well as much as we appreciate the attention that Peter has taken to be able to assure us that the study is going on, that we don't have to wait for a resolution, because that's awesome. I think everybody is really in favor of that. And Nikki, thank you for having proposed and then pulling which we think was appropriate. But the question is, why are we in such a hurry to go in there and make the bylaws changes? And as a former secretary, and for any of you who have done secretary, you know that's kind of a big deal, hard to unwind. Why are we doing it before the study which has already begun, has come to any conclusive efforts? I think that's the crux of what people really don't understand and they're opposed to. And if that means that we have to wait until next year, I'm not sure. Well, that's probably what the outcome would be. And we don't see that we prefer to be able to, you know, let that deliberation take its course and bring it to the members, and then we can make an informed decision. So that's the big hot topic at the present.
If I could just make a comment on that. I'm not too sure what the research is about, but I'm concerned because I think a lot of times we kind of know the answer to the research. And as we continue to dwell on that, we continue to wait, we're just pushing back what needs to happen. So again, I'm not in tune with exactly all the detail, but I think we kind of know what we should probably be doing, and I hate to delay it.
Thank you, Drake. Any other final comments?
Made a comment on the chat too, which is
let's see,
along the same lines.
Yep, I see that. Thank you, Brian, for adding.
I just want to second what Drake was saying, because I'm a minority as well, and oftentimes what happens is we know it needs to be done, but then the pushback to not do it is we need more research. We need more research. And so what is the research hoping to find that we don't already know? And is it, you know, it's almost like, are we hoping to find research that proves we don't need to do anything? Because right now it's very clear that things do need to be done. So I'm not sure what the delay would even solve, or even putting an additional $100,000 into research. What is that going to do that we don't already know?
If I may, because this is not going to have a significant impact on how we function in California, since we've been a state in the region all this time, we would be losing one person, but we've watched in history our representation that California has lost and gained. What I don't understand, and what I think we really need to be sensitive to, is those regions who have lots of clusters of small states. I think Montana, you can count the AI members on one hand, something like that. So how is this going to impact that flow of information representation? I do think, particularly with the smaller, with the multi-state regions, I think it's fair to let those people speak, because we're not in their position. We don't know what those changes are going to be for them in terms of representation. And I have to say, you know, of course, being a woman in architecture for all these years, I really don't think this is an issue of is an issue of any sort of group, whether it's cultural or, I think that this is, we're all in this together. We're all members. We're looking for proper representation. And I just feel like I'm not in a position to speak to those people and to the issues that are important to them and how this is going to change that. That's what I don't know. And I think we need to all know that.
So I just wanted to add to what Betsy said. I served 10 years ago at National, and in those 10 years, the organization has not actually looked at the governance model, whatever it's going to be. And I think the formers and the chancellors really believe that this should have started. I believe that it's long overdue. I will say that parenthetically, I hear that relationships with components are not very good with National, which makes me exceptionally sad. So I think the group that has served, and again, we do not want to feel that we need to step into that leadership again, but we do think that for the organization's health, it absolutely has to happen. And that's why, to what Betsy was articulating too, it is really essential that we do this. And yes, I couldn't agree more. We shouldn't be waiting on this, and we tend to take too long in terms of figuring that out. And this is a perfect example of 10 years should not have expired beyond when we put this in place.
Hey, Brett, this is Brian. I don't, if I can add to my comment, which as I'm reading through it, my spell check was not working, so I apologize.
Noted.
What I'm trying to figure out with all this when this discussion began is that when the Strategic Council was formed, and I had the opportunity to serve both on the board and as secretary in the old format and on the first class of the Strategic Council in the new format, the thing that I found really interesting was it was with the desire to create a structure that provided sort of a think tank within the AIA and then basically a smaller group that had all the responsibilities of executing what was coming out of that think tank, so to speak. And instead what I found was that there was really a bright line drawn between the Strategic Council and the board. The representation for the average member, and it's usually, I'll go back to the average member. I always feel that the vitality of the AIA is really grounded in the connection of the average member to having a voice at the national level. And before the restructuring with the council, that voice was through your regional director to the board. And you had a direct link. So if there was an issue that was taking place locally, you could call up your regional director, who you most likely had a pretty good, at least a relationship where you could pick up the phone, have a conversation, and that would be discussed at the board meeting. When I brought up with the elected folks on the board when the council was first formed, how's that communication going to take place? They made it very clear that the representatives on the council were no longer representing their membership from a policy standpoint. That I said, well, then how does that person have a voice? They said, well, they should just pick up the phone and call the president. And I said, how likely is that to happen? This was a conversation I had specifically with Tom Vanier at the time. And the comment was, well, they can always pick up the phone and call me. And I said, Tom, how likely is a member in Kansas, out in the middle of nowhere, who doesn't know you, they're going to pick up the phone and call the president of the institute because they have an issue that's occurring locally? So my feeling is whatever structure comes out of this, and I don't know why the rush to dissolve, I don't know what dissolving the regions hopes to accomplish, but if we somehow we need to reestablish that connection between the voice of the average person, as Betsy said, somebody in Bozeman, Montana, with the Institute feeling like they have an opportunity to really have their voice heard directly in the boardroom as policy is being made. And right now that's vested in 15 people. So it's a little hard to make that direct connection, especially if none of those people are elected from your location. We're fortunate to have some people from California on the board, but that's not the typical situation. I will stop.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, and thank you for everybody who commented and added, but we're going to move on to make sure we have enough time for our candidates. So I appreciate the dialogue, and it will be continued. So we're going to move on now. We're going to start introducing the candidates, beginning with our candidate for first vice president. Each candidate will have 4 minutes to introduce themselves and answer a pre-populated question that we've already circulated to them. Please hold off on any questions you have for specific candidates until the very end and put them in the chat. We'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A once everybody's had a chance to speak. So with that, as I said, we'll introduce Emily Grandstaff Rice. Emily, would you like to take the floor? I will ask you a question now regarding balancing priorities. AIA has made a significant commitment to proactive advocacy and environmental stewardship. However, recent events have also led the AIA board to make an equal commitment to social justice issues. How can AIA most effectively balance these major initiatives at the national level? And what support can AIA provide to components to ensure a coordinated approach? Emily?
Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you, AIA California, for hosting us today. I love this question because it gets at the heart of leadership in a complex world. When you have to make decisions that are nuanced, it's a yes and type of proposition rather than a yes or. So first, let's talk about the 2019 AIA board commitment to urgent climate action, dubbed the big move at the time, because for the first time, there was a singular coordinated focus. That commitment was clear and mobilizing. It felt good, right? Then 2020 changed us all in profound ways. And I think it's safe to say that many of us saw the world and our environment through a new perspective. For some, their lived experience was finally getting the platform that it needed. The commitment to social justice was a necessary reaction. And I would argue that we probably came to it a little bit too late. It recognized years of structural racism, systemic injustice, and how architecture perpetuates those frameworks. The AIA came to that commitment in a different way than advancing human and ecological health. It felt different, and I wouldn't use the word good to describe it. So I think sometimes there's an undercurrent that because this commitment was made as a reaction rather than to be proactive, as you say in your question, it's not of the same level, and that couldn't be further from the truth. So let me break it down a little further. Climate change affects us all, but not equally. Often who's at the table while policy is made can affect who receives resources first, especially when affected by natural disasters. Even if everyone had access and privilege to reduce their individual carbon footprint, the climate crisis would still exist. We must think bigger. We must think in terms of systems, and we must commit to work together. It's not a competition, gold, silver, platinum. It's more than that. There's a connection between climate and social justice. The communities that are most impacted by racial injustice are the same communities that are most impacted by climate change and climate injustice. So where do we go from here to achieve the balance that the question asks? We use a lens of social justice when evaluating AIA efforts towards urgent climate action, asking questions of whether the work is equitable and who's at the table. And that also includes who's at the AIA decision-making table. We use a lens of advancing human and ecological health when evaluating AIA's growing practice of social justice awareness. We maintain a communal practice that prioritizes the responsibility to access the most basic rights: clean water, clean air, healthy buildings for all. The AIA highlights and curates the frameworks that have already been developed from the NAACP to the UN New Urban Agenda and Sustainable Design Goals. There's many more that we can look at. We use our platform to create partnerships. We ramp up visibility and strategic alliances. The AIA should develop open source resources that components can customize and use at the local level that respond to their unique local issues and build upon international research. We need to resist the urge for these efforts to have one single voice. We can have a single direction, but our strength is in the diversity of the message. From Massachusetts to Missouri to Mississippi or Montana, same framework, but delivered authentically in the chapter level. We'll need commitments for the boards of 2022 and 2023 and beyond. And that means we'll need to do the work in making sure that all levels understand the topics and the needs. Lastly, we should set interim goals and metrics that speak to both the head and the heart, by which to measure what is working and what needs further development. AI leadership is always big on new ideas, right? But to get back to my first statement of leading in a complex world, you also need to understand how well you are doing it. Our goal is not just awareness, but impact. So you might sense a strong tone from me, but I assure you I'm very optimistic that we can do this. And I see a connection between urgent climate action and social justice. Those two cannot be separated. The challenge is for us to continue to recognize their intersectionality and not advance one at the detriment of the other. So I thank you very much for the question.
Thank you, Emily, very much. And I should have mentioned at the beginning of this, Rona Rothenberg, our first VP, president-elect for next year, will help me kind of co-moderate this, and she will introduce Abby. Rona?
Thank you all. Thanks, Brett. I'd like to introduce Abby P. Suckle, FAIA, AIA New York Chapter, AIA New York. Abby. In advocacy in enhancing the architect's role in communities, the AIA has made a significant commitment and investment in training architects as advocates. How can the AIA leverage this initiative and empower both local components and individual members with the tools to become integral players in their local communities?
Can you hear me? This is an important question. And I thought a lot about my own personal experiences. When I was 12 years old, my father was killed in a plane crash at JFK. My 35-year-old mother was left with 4 small children, one with special needs. She was a practical woman. She took stock of her situation and thought her best option was basically to remarry as soon as she could. I took the opposite approach and resolved to create things that might last longer than I would. So a few years later, I found myself in the first large class of women architecture students at Harvard. Afterwards, I wrote a book, worked in a few firms, including Paycott Freed, where I stayed for a long time. It goes without saying that I was given the opportunity to do interiors, make less than the men, work all holidays, and be the last one in the office at night and the first one back in the morning to eternally prove my dedication. I absolutely loved it. I lobbied to get assigned to projects in California, and eventually I was put on the San Francisco Main Library. In order to construct the building, the site needed to be cleared, which included relocating the much beloved Pioneer Monument. The Chronicle and Examiner had a field day enumerating concerns, each of which was dutifully addressed. The whole exercise ended early one morning when the monument was just put up on wheels and dragged to a new location. Pencil sharpened, our newly empowered critics moved on to bigger targets. The next one was the card catalog, and it was the first library to have an online card catalog, which left us with lots of now useless cards. An artist was commissioned to repurpose them, and San Franciscans were invited to write about how they felt about the books. This got plastered on 3 floors of information desks, which looked quite beautiful, but as you could imagine, that was beside the point. A city full of articulate citizens was up in arms. Passionate articles were penned everywhere, including the New Yorker, about the destruction caused by embracing technology, with the end result that the city council met and we had to completely recreate the whole thing and rearrange the furniture. So one weekday morning, not too long after, a skydiver descended, a ribbon was cut, and the citizens poured into the building. Within the hour, there were no seats to be had in the reading room. The criticism abruptly faded and the love affair began. This experience taught me a lot. It taught me about the power of architecture. It taught me what resonates, what it takes to transform a city, and how to measure success. These are lessons that we had to put in practice after September 11th, when we began picking up the pieces of one shattered neighborhood in New York to give it structure, to redefine itself and reboot. I was part of all the initiatives, the committee meetings, and the design charrettes. 10 years later, we did it again with Sandy, where risk and resiliency were pushed to the front burner. We've done a lot through the AIA, and what I've learned is that primarily we really have to teach the public how to understand what we build, what we do, how it came to be, and how it fits into the places we put it so that they will be better participants. For me, educating the public has become an obsession, and I've spent a lot of time trying to demystify it through the AIA. I've created maps and exhibitions, tours, and events such as October including the most successful, which is our Museum Without Walls from Culture Now, which went on to get the Collaborative Achievement Award. In 2013, I ran a summer internship program at the AIA Los Angeles with USC students, where we took a deep look at that city. Carlo Cacaval, Deborah Gerard, and Michael Lair asked me to update the app Los Angeles content for the 2020 convention because they said it was the best look at the city. And the new and improved version will be launched for October, but I consider it a first step because what I do is I welcome the Citizen Architect Initiative because it frames much of what we did in a way that could be scalable. And I think we should take our experience plus the framework that they have actually begun to provide, and which I will work to enhance if indeed I do get the opportunity to serve as your 2022 First Vice President. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. All right, so now let's move on to the candidates for 2022-23 Treasurer. And first to the table, we will invite Timothy C. Hawk, FAIA, from AIA Columbus, AIA Ohio. Welcome, Tim.
Hello there.
Hello. All right, so here's your question. On the economy. As we emerge from the pandemic, the economy will undoubtedly influence the profession's health and welfare. In this regard, what roles, programs, and activities should National AIA initiate in order to support both AIA components and the individual member?
So I think this is where we really have a huge opportunity. The pandemic has forced our profession to really reconsider our value. And as I've talked to members across the Institute, it's apparent that many members feel an increased sense of responsibility. So there are significant challenges that need to be addressed, and many of us feel that they're pressing. And almost all of the members that I've talked to are concerned about our relevance. And many of us see all of these issues that architects can solve, but no one seems to be connecting the dots. So our strategic plan at the AIA calls for prioritizing climate action and equity, diversity, and inclusion within the framework of design excellence. And we are called to mobilize for impact, to come together, to educate members, and to prepare our members, advancing knowledge through research and establishing a much broader tent. And as treasurer, I think the treasurer of the AIA is responsible for guiding the allocation of our resources. So my plan would be to connect our finances to the work of government advocacy, public outreach, equity in the future of architecture, and the climate action and design excellence areas. And right now, the Finance Committee is situated somewhat independently from the other committees. And I feel that we must connect these areas of focused activity to the Finance Committee. And I can help connect the dots. Through this, I think the process would reveal opportunities we have to streamline redundant expenses and focus our efforts to increase our impact. And in some ways then, I really just want to kind of use my design skills to help link financial strategy to our mission. So I think there's another secondary area that can help the AIA connect to components and individual members. And I think that there needs to be oversight of some pretty big expenditures that we're planning for the next few years. In 2020, as many of you know, the AIA divested our contract documents division, and we created a for-profit LLC, and this is nested within the AIA organization. This entity has the potential to establish an investment plan that could endow our organization for years. And I want to be a part of the conversation because I feel it's important to link the investment plan to our strategic plan. We're also looking to undertake a big spend to update and transform our headquarters. And the work is being led by EHDD out of San Francisco, as many of you know. And as part of this project, I feel we must also use the opportunity to remake the national office operationally. If we only change our physical environment in this project, I really think that we'll not be effective. And as treasurer, I believe as an officer of the organization, I feel that we have the opportunity to help influence the overall operations of the organization to make us more efficient and more effective. So thank you for inviting us to your town hall today.
Thank you, Tim, and I'll hand it back to Rona.
I'd like to introduce Heather P. Phillip O'Neill, AIA New York, a chapter, AIA New York. So Heather.
Hello, everyone.
Regarding emerging professionals and the future of our profession. The economic uncertainty that is impacting the profession will have a disproportionate impact on emerging professionals. How can the AIA support these members during these challenging times and support them as volunteer leaders?
Hello, everyone. I am an active AIA member in the New York chapter and an NCARB licensing advisor. I'm a practicing architect as well, mainly as the principal of HPP International LLC, where we focus on residential architecture specializing in affordable and supportive housing. I am also an adjunct professor of architecture at the New York Institute of Technology. In addition to the fiduciary responsibilities as the next treasurer, I am interested primarily because of the widespread consciousness which has created an opportunity to guide and advance the justice and equity imperatives of the AIA strategic plan. To answer the question, how can the AIA support emerging professionals during this time of economic uncertainty? We know that in past economic recessions, many emerging professionals left the profession because of a lack of opportunity. Today, the AIA is more prepared for this. It is now a matter of making sure that they, the emerging professionals, are aware of the Center for Emerging Professionals. What they offer there can be found on the AIA website. This is an underutilized resource. It will help to make the EPs aware that we are thinking of their problems. We can now take steps to avoid a repeat of losing a generation of professionals by connecting them with the NAC, the National Associates Committee. The objective being to create connections through networks. These networks may be developed with the NAC or with the YAF, the Young Architects Forum. Most engagement happens at the local level. The AIA can continue to encourage local chapters to provide ways for students, recent graduates, and emerging professionals to be involved in the organization. The intent is to connect emerging professionals with experienced architects who are there to support them with a reliable employment network, career advice, and leadership opportunities. Hopefully, the connections will happen in person, but if not, it is still viable if it is done virtually. As we facilitate these connections, we should take care to follow the vision of the National Committees for Emerging Professionals. And that vision is to engage and connect with a diverse membership and to lead by example as we promote mentoring, fellowship, licensure, advocacy, and service. The key is to keep emerging professionals engaged with the AIA and with the profession. Thank you for the invitation.
All right, thank you, Heather. Oh, sorry, Rona. All right, so let's move on to the next category for 2022-24 at-large directors. And first up in this category is Kevin M Holland, FAIA, representing AIA California and AIA LA. And Kevin, your question is about connection between academia and the profession. How can the AIA advocate for a balanced and integrated approach to preparing the next generation of architects from education to entry in the profession?
Brett, thank you for that question. And I'd like to thank AIA California for the opportunity to present today. My response is a strategic statement towards increasing relevance and not necessarily a critique of the academy. Not to overly simplify the how portion, that's the easy part. You simply commit to advocating. I would like to believe that many of the schools would love to have a conversation with the AIA. But rather, I think the question should be what we are advocating. We need to teach in such a way that architecture is a part of society and understand that greater societal needs, politics, and funding greatly impact what we do, how we do it, and when we do it. One of the previous questions that I received in the caucus was, how do we make architecture relevant? We make architecture relevant by understanding what people are prioritizing and spending money on. I'm willing to wager that every developer in the country, when they heard the proposed federal spending bill, put together a strategy on how that spending bill would impact their current and future development. They participate in the writing of bills, which directs the money. We then, as a profession, at best follow them. At worst, we wait to be summoned by them after decisions have been made, and we've relegated ourselves to a commodity status. We should advocate for an education that teaches how spending priorities impact architecture and how that impacts the needs of society. We should advocate for an education that includes putting us, at the table as federal spending and infrastructure bills are being written. We should advocate for an education that teaches what it means to architects, architecture, and society, what $400 billion in clean energy tax credits means, what $650 billion for physical infrastructure improvements, what that means, what $300 billion for housing infrastructure means for us, what $300 billion for the electric grid can mean for us, both good and bad. It sounds like there's a lot of opportunities for renewable energy, sustainability, housing for the homeless, if we just understand what the governmental priorities are. And so I believe that's something that we need to also instill in our students while they're still in school. So thanks again for this platform and for your consideration.
Thank you, Kevin. And then we'll have Rona come back to introduce our next candidate.
Welcome to Ricardo J. Rodriguez de Santiago, Associate AIA, AIA Washington, D.C. Ricardo, in regard to enhancing member value, how can the AIA support local components' efforts to provide core services, increase member awareness, and support efforts for those not actively involved to engage the organization?
Gracias, Rona, y buenas tardes a todos. I appreciate the question. So I think that one of the reasons or one of the ways that we can actually get forward in this discussion on how to increase the core competencies or services at the component level is by acknowledgement that our policies and statements done at national, in order for them to really have traction and be genuinely effective within our local components, is that we need to focus on the how. A lot of times we focus too much on the content, but we do not necessarily provide the vehicles to make these things happen. It's almost like there is a part of the company developing products, but then the part that meets the customers does not have access to inventory. So with that, I think that access to tools and resources, and what I mean by that is if we're pushing on climate action, if we're pushing on EDI and social justice, then let's provide access to building simulation software, to means of getting access to embodied carbon credits or carbon footprint offset credits. We need to go after these resources as a whole. If we're thinking about how does this translate from the core competencies of maybe a chapter where you want to have access to event planning software, the metrics and analytics that you need from the whole intellectual body that is the AIA, the way that meets the rubber with members and increasing their engagement really is in providing value. that value has to be tangible at this day and age. I think that what we've seen in the pandemic is that firms really need access to the tools required to make the change and be able to compete in the market at the speed of the market. So while I think that a way of making folks more involved is by reaching them in the tools and the resources that they actually need. So an example I give of that, I think that the internet and the cell phone changed everything. And we need to stop thinking that these things, that there is a discussion on climate change and a discussion on EDI that is separate from the execution of it. We have to realize that while we might not have complete competence over the way we produce and get the tools and traction of these things, we have to expand the tent for that. And that means reaching out to a new type of professionals that do these potentially better than us. That means engaging with intellectual property that we could use as an investment and non-dues revenue kind of shared with our components. So all this, I think the underline for me is there has to be a change of mindset. One thing that we hear time and time again is that there's a strategic plan that will allow us to change. And we hear change from the components, we hear about change from the knowledge communities, but there is very little reporting or transparency on how this change is going to happen and how are we measuring it. So I see that the board has a fiduciary duty with that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Ricardo. And now we'll move on to our last candidate of our town hall today, Alton P. Chow, AIA from AIA Shanghai. And your question is on AIA as leaders in climate action. AIA has taken bold steps to move the organization forward in terms of environmental stewardship. What role do you see each level of AIA taking to provide resources to propel the bell and help architects be better prepared to help clients and communities across the country? Alton?
Hi, everybody. First of all, I just wanted to say thank you for the opportunity. It's great to be meeting with all the people from California. I was born in the Bay Area and grew up in Southern California and worked my first career in LA at DMJM. So it's really good to kind of connect with you guys. So I wanted to kind of, instead of just focusing just on this question, I want to kind of zoom out a little bit, because I think one of the things that I really have been wanting to focus on is really about kind of driving deliverable action items for things that we're trying to do with the AIA. I think that one of the things that I've been doing over the past couple months has been reaching out to a lot of the different chapters, a lot of different states, and talking to a lot of different people. One of the biggest comments that I've really heard has really been about kind of the connection between national and decisions made on the national level to things that are really happening on the chapter level or on the state level. And if elected as the at-large director, one of the things I really want to try to do is to really try to connect and try to facilitate that connection by not just only being available to people to reach out to me and to talk to me, but also really being able to try to reach out to individual chapters and see kind of what's going on with them. One of the key things that I've been seeing in terms of patterns is a strong sense of advocacy that's been happening, whether pushing equity or whether we're talking about propelling the bell or environmental stewardship. But one of the things that I've been hearing a lot has been about like the lack of guidance or connection to being able to understand kind of what's actually happening. I think on the national level, what could be really important is that besides just taking a stand and making moves independently towards environmental stewardship, I think what we really need to start to do is we need to start to associate our organization with institutions or organizations or movements that are actually doing this full time. Ultimately, I think the AIA, we have 80,000 members, and we have a significant footprint in our profession. But I think if we're really trying to kind of move the dial, we need to kind of put our money and spend our money a little bit smarter and put our resources a little bit smarter by partnering and putting our name with other organizations. I think on a national level that we should be having that conversation to see how we can leverage our buck a little bit better. But I think on the chapter level or on the state level, I think what's really important is about kind of really improving connection, really improving communication. I think that there are a lot of kind of low-hanging fruit things that we could do. You know, my background actually is I lead commercial development markets for AECom globally. So one of the things that I do is I kind of act as an in-house consultant where, you know, on a corporate level, we make certain directions on how things are going to go. But then on an office level, I would go to these offices to kind of talk about what they're doing and how do we strategize on actually setting up deliverable metrics per quarter, per year, per 3 years, and to have stages, and that way we can kind of track and monitor these things. I think a lot of times organizations like the AIA are very good at kind of creating these large, zoomed out, you know, 1 to 2,000 kind of scale, big movements and big directions, and then the individual chapters, or in my case, you know, my office, would just have to kind of figure out things on themselves with not as much communication as they have. And then my job actually in my company is to kind of connect and to help facilitate these things. And that's kind of what I would like to do with the AIA if elected as at-large director. Pretty much that's about all I have to kind of say for that. I just have to say that, you know, one of the things that I really am concerned about is I think that we talk about climate action, we talk about equity, and I think these are big social issues that the AIA is, that we should be involved in, we should be taking a stand in. But I do have to stress that I think that AIA is a professional organization. We are architects. There really isn't anybody else that's looking out for us except for us in that sense. And I think we really need to start having a conversation on future disruptions that are going to be happening in our industry. You know, AI is going to be taking over our industry very quickly. You know, they're going to be removing stages from like DD and CD and CA potentially. How does that affect our business? And we should be having a conversation to see how we can get in front of this so that as this disruption happens, it will provide less impact to our profession and to our industry. So thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Alton. All right, so we are quickly approaching the end of the town hall here with 6 minutes to go. I think I saw one question, but then I also see that Emily has responded to Gabrielle's question. I don't know, Emily, if you had any more follow-up on that assessment. Otherwise, if others have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
Right. I think I said as much as I need to say in the chat.
Perfect.
And just, you know, Gabrielle,
Yeah.
really good point. Thank you. Thank you.
Perfect. If anybody else wants to have 6 minutes here with the candidates. And you can just feel free to unmute yourself if you'd rather not type.
Well, Brett, since I can unmute, this is Betsy. I just, no relation, by the way, anybody. I just wanted to thank you guys for making this opportunity available to us, specifically as Californians through the California lens, early in the game so that we have time to thoughtfully digest everything that's been discussed. So well done. Thank you, guys.
Brett, this is Emily. Do you mind if I make a really quick comment? Because I think
Sure.
all the candidates don't often get together. I just want to say, you know, this is the most diverse slate the AIA has ever seen, and that's a move forward. But I don't want us to become complacent about that. And I think it's important for AIA California and for any region or chapter or state to continue to highlight leaders moving forward, because it really helps the health of the Institute. And I kind of joked earlier, there's been more AIA presidents named Robert than women. So at the end of the day, you're getting 2 really good female candidates, and that's pretty awesome.
I have a question. This is Ethel Rubio.
Yes.
So for all the candidates, and feel free to just chime in. My background is actually more general because I do work in the construction industry more than the architecture, traditional architecture. So I'm pretty much in tune with what other organizations are in the built environment. So in your own perspective, a lot of these organizations are gearing towards the United Nations 17 Sustainability Development Goals. Where does AIA, or where do you think AIA should position themselves in aligning with these goals? or have you heard of them? Anybody?
I say anyone of our at-large directors maybe want to take a stab at it.
I'll take a stab at it by acknowledging that I have not heard of that United Nations kind of goal, frankly. But one thing I will say that I think that is indicative that as a profession as big and large as we think we are, we definitely have an issue with communicating with others, right? And we need to get out of our comfort zone for that. And admitting that we don't know everything, I think is a way of doing that. And the more we act as a platform or a body that cares about business empowerment more so than in its own subsistence and connecting with others, particularly with the trades, the general contractors, that is the way that we win the climate game. So thank you for the question, and you gave me homework.
Thank you, Ricardo. I'd like to hear from the other candidates, please.
Well, this is Emily. I just put into the... Go ahead, Lisa.
Okay. Is Lisa a candidate?
Yeah, I was going to answer because I thought somebody asked for somebody from the council to respond, but I think it's better if the candidates do. So
yeah, I appreciate candidates' response, actually.
Can I answer that? Because we've done a lot of thinking about sustainability, resiliency, and I've been on lots of committees, including at the moment Zero Waste in New York. But fundamentally, what I think we should do is leverage the fact we have 90,000 people. We have more research than you can possibly imagine. We just don't make it that easily accessible. And our first thing that we can do, we are people who, every single one of us went to design school. And every single one of us has a really good idea about how to solve complicated problems. And my God, this is the most complicated. And it involves everything and everybody. And from California all the way to New York and everything in between, including the coast. And I think as one AIA, we need to say we've got 90,000 really talented, very smart people who know as much or more than anybody on the whole planet on how to do this. And our best exercise is how we get us all together and kind of figure out where the good, you know, how to solve it in a big way, and then how to reach out in little ways so that local communities can take advantage of some of these issues. I think this is an opportunity where the whole country is busy thinking about infrastructure, climate change, and the fact that we just sat home for a year, trying to reimagine who we are and do we want to go to work every day. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to utilize what we bring to the table, which is amazing, and transform us and transform our environment, because we kind of have to. And if we don't do it, we're not going to leave much of a world for our children or even their children. So I just think it's really important. And it's kind of what motivated me to reach out and become interested in trying to do this. And excellent. I would hope that all of you would collaborate and use ourselves as the beginning of whatever task force and focus groups we needed in order to make the concerns from, you know, Pasadena and Sacramento all the way to Pensacola, Florida, and everything in between.
Thank you, Abby. And thank you. This brings us to the top of the hour here. So thank you all for attending. Thank you to our candidates. And we wish you all the best of luck in the coming weeks during the elections. We appreciate everybody's time. Stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Take care.